I'm Melissa Shanahan, and this is the Velocity Work Podcast, episode number 107. This podcast is for attorneys who are running their own firms. We explore tactics, tools, and stories related to pushing past simply lawyering well and into building a successful firm. Working in your firm and working on your business are two very different things. This podcast focuses on the latter. Hey guys, welcome back to this week's episode. This is the second of a duet, so to speak. Last week, we talked about goals and rocks. I explained what each one of them was and how to think about them. I gave some examples of private clients and then also mastery group members, which essentially means they are very different places in their business. Mastery group members are typically under $1 million, and then private clients are closer to $1 million and up. And on that note, this is a perfect time to go ahead and say this. For mastery group, I want you all to know it's insanely reasonable to join Mastery Group. I did that on purpose. I had a member join 2 months ago or 3 months ago now that said, I would have joined so much sooner, but I never went and looked at the page, so I didn't know how much it cost, and I just assumed it was going to be too much of an investment. I didn't think I was going to be able to afford it, so I never really went to do it. I was like, wow, okay, good to know. So I'm telling y'all now, right now, as this episode airs, the price for Velocity Work Mastery Group is $29.70. And that's for a full year. That's quarterly planning retreats. At the turn of the year, we do a bigger one that's for annual. It is awesome, but it really is meant for someone who's somewhere between 100K and 700K, let's just say. And that's rough, but it's just to give you a bit of a guide. Now, if you pay by the month, if you're like, I don't really have $29.70 around at the moment that feels comfortable to spend, it's $297 a month if you want to pay monthly. I hope you guys are smiling at like, oh, that is reasonable. It is. For what you get, it's nuts. But that's the way I wanted it. I wanted this to be a no-brainer. I always want it to be a no-brainer. But I will say this. At some point, we're going to raise the fees. I said it last year about this time, and we did. We raised them at the end of the year. And then I'm saying it now, and we're going to at the end of the year. So for 2022, the rates are going to be different than what I'm saying right now. But if you're listening in real time, those are the rates. We're just getting better and better and tighter, offering more value and more value. So it just makes sense. But get over there. I guess what I'm trying to say is, if you are one of those people who assumed that it was going to be really expensive, you have to understand it isn't. And this program gives you a leg up. It's remarkable. It really is remarkable. So come on and join us. Don't let price be a thing, because it's not a thing. And if you thought it was a thing, now you know it's not a thing. So there you go. Okay, well, let's do today's episode, which is a duet of last week. Last week we talked about goals and rocks, and I explained what both of those were, how to think about that. And today's episode, we're going to be talking about leading indicators versus lagging indicators. This is a term you will hear thrown around quite a bit in the consulting space and any kind of strategic planning. You'll hear it. So I'm going to explain what they are and how I think about them when I'm working with clients. It's not a term that I use all the time with clients, but there's a time and a place where it all sort of comes together and it makes sense to use that terminology. So I want to explain that now on this episode, what the difference is between the two, so that you guys have clarity around it. And if it's helpful, then use this episode, use this information. If it's not, if you feel like it's just a level deeper than you really need to be thinking about things, just throw this out the window. This episode's going to be here whenever you do want to come back to it, if it makes sense for you. And listen, if you're in Mastery Group or if you're a private client, I will be able to share this as necessary as we're planning with you inside the group. But if you're a listener, this episode is here. You can come back to it whenever you want. But I do think it's worth explaining leading versus lagging indicators, especially as it relates to goals and rocks. So let's first start by talking about what is an indicator. So a KPI, or a key performance indicator, is a value that measures your firm's success at meeting its goals. KPIs provide insight into the conditions inside your business, how well you're doing towards your goals, okay? Now, there's the two types of indicators we're going to talk about today, is leading and lagging. Let's start with lagging. So in your current reality, present situation, if you were to look at a lagging indicator, it will tell you the current state of the business. It is a number that reflects the current state. But leading indicators, when you look at those numbers, it's very predictive of what is probably going to be happening. So I'm going to explain both of these better, but that's just a general overview. So when you think about leading indicators, I think they're best described as inputs. They define what actions are necessary to achieve your goals. So this is where, this might sound familiar. Rocks, as an example, are things that when you set a goal, you're saying these rocks are necessary or else I probably won't hit my goal. So indicators are always numbers. So this is why we start to split off a little bit. Leading indicators can sometimes be rocks, but a rock is not always a leading indicator. And I'm going to give you an example to really paint this picture. If you set a rock, if you determine that one of the rocks is to create a system for converting a lead into a client, like that is actually one of the master group members' rocks. They have that listed. That is a rock, but it isn't a number, so it's not a leading indicator. But there's another example of a rock where a master group member, for instance, will say, over the course of a quarter, their rock is to have 10 lunches with potential referral partners. Okay, so now let's think about this. They have said that if they don't do this, they think they will hold themselves back from the next level of success, right? So that's why they deemed it a rock. However, it is measurable. So it is a leading indicator because leading indicators are predictive of what's going to result. And that's what we're trying to say with a rock. It's predictive. It's saying, if I do this, I think I will land at my goal, at my target. Leading indicators also say that. And so in this example, this rock could be a leading indicator. So I'm hoping that you can see where if it's measurable, if it's something that you can measure and it's a rock, then it's a leading indicator. Can you see what I'm saying? Now, here's one other thing, though. I said leading indicators, I think of them as inputs. When I read about leading indicators and lagging indicators, when someone refers to it as an input, when they're trying to describe it, it just makes so much more sense. Input meaning it's the work that you put into, it's the effort that you put forth, it's input, action, effort towards the goal, right? Towards the goal that you have set. Another interesting thing about leading indicators to note is that most of the time, you have a lot more control over a leading indicator than you do of a lagging indicator, which we'll talk about in a second. But you have control over your effort and the results that you can create. And if that's measurable, then it can be considered a leading indicator. So rocks, for example, whether they're measurable or not, and if they can be measurable, that's fantastic. But it's not imperative that rocks are measurable. It's more you will know when you're done because it's a project or it's completed or it's implemented. Like, what is that? What does that end result look like with the completion of that effort? But it doesn't have to be measurable. But sometimes a rock will be measurable. And when that's the case, it is a leading indicator. If you choose to just throw leading indicators and just the knowledge set about leading and lagging indicators out the window, that's totally okay. But there's questions that I get from people, and so I wanted to make sure I did clarify in an episode. Okay, so now let's start to switch our focus to lagging indicators. And the thing is about these, they're named appropriately for a reason. So leading indicators, it's like, okay, we lead with these things. We focus here. And then there's another number that we measure that will tell us where we got, where we landed. And it's the lagging indicator. And it's because it lags behind the effort that's been put in, the upfront work, the other indicators that we're looking at and pushing at and all that. Then it results in another number And that is considered a lagging indicator. It lags behind. It happens after. And so revenue is a perfect example of this. So you put forth this effort, and let's just say, one of the things that you're pushing for is to increase the number of referral partners. So you do set a rock to have 10 lunches in a quarter with potential referral partners. Then the whole point in that is so that more business comes in. And so if that's the leading indicator, is the number of lunches per week that you do or per quarter that you do, and you track that, and do you stay on track with it or do you not? But that's the indicator. Then what the result will be more revenue. And so the revenue goal that you have is considered a lagging indicator. So I hope this helps you start to piece together, okay, leading indicators are where the input is. This is where we can affect things. This is where we have more control and more influence. So we put our focus there. We do the things that we can do to move the needle and pay attention to these leading indicators. And thus, the whole point is we think that those are going to produce and deliver us to the goals we want to see. And that number, that goal, that's the lagging indicator. It lags behind your effort. Okay, this does get more complex, and I have done a ton of reading, research. I have worked with it much more deeply in the consulting firm I used to work for. So I do have a deeper understanding than what I'm giving you right now, but I don't think it's helpful to go deeper. Like if you wanted to geek out on this and really talk about it, then we could do that. But that's just for people who like to geek out about this stuff. And that's probably a conversation over, a glass of wine, a happy hour at the next conference we see each other at. Like it's just not worth putting some curriculum out there that goes much deeper on the topic. Because the goals that you set, for example, the way that I teach to set goals, some of those goals would be considered leading indicators. But is it helpful for you to know that? Like, why does it matter, right? It is what we're shooting for. Some you have more control over than others. We talk about that. We think about that. We work backwards. We set rocks and priorities that have to happen. It's a much more organized way to think about growing your firm. If you were a software development company that was huge and scaling, this might be a different conversation, but we don't need that. All we need is clarity around exactly what we're shooting for and what do we have control over? What is the effort we're going to put forth? So that's why I teach goals and rocks. But leading indicators and lagging indicators do come up. And I do think it's helpful to have a basic understanding. And if you just understand that leading indicators, those are the numbers that you measure and you work towards that will lead you to your goal. The goal is considered a lagging indicator. It lags behind everything else. The revenue comes after the effort that we've already discussed. That's the important piece. Now I'm going to turn to, on my screen, I have pulled up a discussion in the Mastery Facebook group about leading indicators versus lagging indicators. And someone asked in there during the strategic planning retreat that I host for members, we got into a discussion about this. And this is a while back. This was probably towards the beginning of 2021. But I went back, looked it up, and the question was, follow-up question from today's call, are rocks the lead indicators? And I loved the question because it is confusing. And, when you have a big group and everybody's kind of in different places with their firms and different places with how they're thinking about things, these questions aren't the easiest to tackle when we have an objective. They need a plan to leave with. And do they really need this in-depth knowledge? Probably not. But some people want to go there, so we could totally go there. And so I'm looking at the comments because I thought some of these would be great to share with you. So here was my answer. I said, hey, leading indicators define what actions are necessary to achieve your goals with measurable outcomes. They lead you to successfully meeting overall business objectives, which is why they are called leading. So the rocks that have a specific number attached to it could be considered a leading indicator. For instance, member, I'm not going to say their name, wanted to increase her social media engagement or something along those lines. Please correct me if I'm wrong here, but that's too vague of a rock. How are you going to increase your social media engagement? So she set a rock to post to Facebook 26 times, leading indicator, this quarter. Another instance, another member wants to generate more referrals, so she set a rock to have one lunch per week, a leading indicator, in Q2 with potential referral sources. Rocks don't have to be lead indicators, but they can be. The most important things about rocks is that they are clear efforts that will lead you to your goal, aka a lagging indicator. So I hope that helps clear up that the most important thing, and I can say this with conviction because of how long I've been facilitating people with this work and coaching them through it when it's time to execute and seeing them come out on the other side. It is more streamlined and much easier for you to focus on having a clear goal and having rocks that will line you up to that goal, clear efforts that will line you up so that you can hit your goal. And though there's more to it than that, and I can facilitate more deeply with that, that in a nutshell is the most important thing. But there is the concept of leading and lagging indicators that for me, as the more of an expert that you become with this and the more practiced and skilled you become at setting goals and rocks, it is actually helpful for me to take into account the definition of leading and lagging indicators just to have a look from a different angle at what's being set. It's just another way of checks and balances for me to make sure that there's a great full picture here. But it's not necessary for you to geek out about it and to fully understand it. So I don't want you guys to think that if you don't fully understand exactly what leading and lagging indicators are and how to set leading and lagging indicators well, it doesn't mean you're screwed. It doesn't mean you're at a disadvantage. It doesn't mean any of that. The most important thing, you want to set yourself up with an advantage, set a very specific goal, and then determine clear efforts, rocks, that are going to take you there. And I didn't say this last episode, but I'll say it now. Typically, you want somewhere between 3 and 6 rocks every quarter to focus on, and it depends on how big the rocks are with your numbers. You don't want 7 huge ones that probably aren't going to all get accomplished in the quarter. You really do have to kind of think about the bandwidth that you have and that you're willing to give to these efforts, and then decide what you think you have to give. And then you can determine how many rocks make sense. I hope this is helpful. To me, this second piece of the duet between last week's episode and this week's episode, this episode to me just felt like a fun add-on for those of you who have heard that term and you want to understand that term better, that terminology about leading versus lagging indicators. I hope that this gave you more insight. It isn't the end-all be-all. It 100% gets more complex from here, but this is a really good basic understanding of how to think about leading indicators versus lagging indicators. And yeah, super fun to geek out about it. I hope this is helpful for many of you. And listen, if not, you throw this out the window and you just stick with goals and rocks. Just focus there, stick there. That's the winning combination of things anyway. So, all right. Okay, everybody. Thank you so much, and I'll see you here next Tuesday. Hey there. If you enjoyed this podcast, I highly recommend you come and check out Mastery Group. It is where owner attorneys come together to study this material, apply it, and thus create really big results for their firm and for their life. So come on over, velocitywork.com/join to get more information and get started. Show notes from this episode can be found at velocitywork.com/podcast.